Hey everyone, my name is Anna.
And my name is Priya, and we're so excited to welcome you to the second video in our Outspoken speaker series. We got the chance to talk to Miss Wiens today about voter education and voter suppression. And while it's important to note that a lot of times many people cannot have the privilege to vote, for those of you that do, we really recommend that you watch this video and learn a bit more about that civic duty that you have. Today, we're going to be talking about voter education and voter suppression. So we're really excited to have Miss Wiens with us today. Could you please tell us about yourself and a little bit about what you teach?
Yeah, hi, my name's Skyler Wiens. So this coming year will be my 9th year to teach. I teach AP Government, AP Economics, both micro and macro, and then on-level economics at Bentonville West High School in Centerton. I've lived in Northwest Arkansas for since I was 13, so about 10 years, no, more than that. Anyway, so I live in Pea Ridge, have a 4-year-old daughter and my husband, 2 dogs, huge animal lover, huge current events lover. So, yeah.
Why did you get into teaching?
Well, actually, originally when I went to college, I did not set out to be a teacher. So I originally wanted to be a dental hygienist. But that I got a couple years in school and I was like, you know what, it's just not really what I wanted to do. So I actually went to the U of A and kind of explored my options. And I knew that I loved politics. I knew that I loved government. I've always loved that. And history, social studies. And so, you know, my mom kind of was like, well, what about if you got a degree in that, then maybe you could teach it. And so I decided to do that. And I've always loved learning. I've always loved going to school. You know, I was that nerd at the beginning of the year that loved to buy school supplies and all of that stuff. And I loved working with kids, and I did some work with a summer camp. And so it was just a nice fit, and I really, really enjoy it. And now I can't imagine myself doing anything else.
So what are some of your goals as a teacher, just overall?
I think probably my first goal is building relationships. So building relationships, getting to know the kids, giving my kids like a space where they can come and they can feel like they're heard, that they're listened to, that they're respected, that they can, you know, feel free to ask me anything and we can talk about stuff. And just, it's more than just me teaching the content. It's, you know, teaching those soft skills, social skills. But I've taught a lot of kids who didn't really have an adult that cared about them. And so I try to be that person if I can. And then I think secondly, teaching social studies is about teaching kids critical thinking, how to think for themselves, and inspire curiosity about the world, and trying to gain a bigger understanding of, you know, why is our government set up this way? Why do we do things a certain way? That kind of thing. And then one thing I always say is I'm here to educate, not indoctrinate. And so I want kids to think for themselves. I want them to see, I try to teach all sides of an issue, and then, you know, help kids make up their mind about it and not be afraid to question authority.
So how do you feel that economics and politics overlap and interact? And then what do you think is the importance of understanding that?
So I would say economics is everywhere. It's not just the stock market. It's not just gross domestic product. It's everywhere. And so it's choices. It's very much behavior. It's sort of like psychology or sociology. It's about how we make decisions and choices given limited resources. And that's life. We never have enough of everything that we want or need. And so we have to decide, you know, what choices and decisions we're going to make. And I feel like how that relates to politics or government is, well, the government has to deal with scarcity, and how do we determine who gets what and what's fair? And I feel that the majority of politicians don't know a whole lot about economics. They don't necessarily know how economics works. And so we need to understand that, so that when they try to tell us about unemployment or try to tell us about GDP growth, we can say, I don't know if that's quite right. So just being more knowledgeable citizen, and how to understand what's in the news, what's economics affects your daily life. And so how all of that plays together. And I feel like if you have a better understanding of both, of one, you'll have a better understanding of both and how they work together.
So were you ever exposed to politics or voting in high school? And if so, like in what ways?
I would say I had a good civics teacher. And I mean, I learned some in there. I had a really good AP Human Geography teacher who also taught government. And so he really kind of inspired me to be a critical thinker and look at things in a different way. But other than that, like I would say where I got my interest or my spark to be interested in politics and government would be my parents. They're both super, super engaged and super knowledgeable about current events in the world. My dad has volunteered for political parties. He's been a poll watcher. He's done lots of things, and they used to take me with them when I was little, when they would vote every time. And so I feel like that's really that they inspired me more than anything I experienced in high school necessarily.
How do you think the current Arkansas public school curriculum educates our young voters?
So I would say, you know, Arkansas, you have to take civics to graduate. It's okay. It's not bad. It's got some good things about it. It's only a semester. And I, you know, if I, in an ideal world, I feel like it should be a year long because I taught it and it's hard to get that much information in a semester. Something I feel like they could add is there is no, and I was looking at the curriculum guide actually, there's no mention of voting necessarily. There's no mention of explaining to kids how to register to vote or how to vote or what are the requirements, what are the rules, absentee voting and all of that stuff. And I feel like that's the real world stuff that kids really need. Sure, they need to know the branches of government. Sure, they need to know the Electoral College and all of that. But they also need to know how to actually be an engaged citizen.
And kind of going off of that, what do you think is the importance of voting in elections, whether they're local or like more on a countrywide basis?
I would say, I mean, obviously that's the main way that you can affect change. It's the main way that you can make your voice heard. And I know a lot of people say, oh, well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't affect my daily life. But I think right now is a perfect example of how your vote can directly impact your life. The school board voted. School boards all across the United States are voting whether or not we should have masks. That directly impacts students' lives and parents' lives. When the governor made the mask mandate, and governors all over the United States, that's directly impacting your life. And there's so many elections, especially local elections for city officials or county officials, that are within just a few hundred or sometimes even a few votes of each other. And so because not very many people vote in them, an election could be swayed with one vote. Okay. And I know that the Electoral College a lot of times makes people feel like if they're living in a safe state one way or the other, sometimes people feel like they don't have a huge amount of say. But I would say that it's still important to make your voice heard. It's also important, like I said, in those ballot initiatives, those local elections, school board governors, state senators, state reps, that kind of thing.
Going off of your response to that question, what do you think could be done to increase voter education in Arkansas?
I would say making sure that, like I said, kind of going back to that school thing and making sure we really teach kids the importance of voting, but how, like, what do you actually do? Like the logistical stuff of how to register to vote. Something that I know a lot of schools do is before kids leave, they give them a chance to register to vote. And so the school actually registers them to vote. They give them the form and they take it. And so I feel like that's crucial because studies have shown that if you vote early, you're more likely to vote consistently throughout your life. And then people need to, I guess, know about what resources are available. There's lots and lots of great websites that are available. With the internet, you can look up just about anything. And I guess people utilizing resources and trying to make sure that you are also taking personal responsibility to make sure that you know what you're voting for before you go to the polls. And so watching the news, looking at candidates' websites, looking at social media, but also, and I'll share a few websites later on that are great, but just doing research. And I know that takes time though. That's a problem for, I would say for anybody, but especially people who maybe work more or work irregular hours. And so I guess anything we can do to increase the access to information and increase the access to reliable information is key.
In talking about voting, what does voter suppression look like, and how does it affect different groups of people in Arkansas specifically?
So I would say in Arkansas, probably the clearest example that some people would say is voter suppression are voter ID laws. And so Arkansas fairly recently passed a voter ID law. They passed one, the Supreme Court struck it down, and they had to fix it. But basically, when you go to the polls, you have to show a photo ID. So it could be driver's license, work ID, passport, anything like that. So that is not easiest for everybody. A lot of people say, oh, well, you drive, you got a driver's license, that's fine. Well, not everybody has that. And in order to get a driver's license, you have to provide certain documents. And it costs money. So one thing that Arkansas did when they redid the voter ID law was they will provide free photo identification to anyone who needs it. And you can go to your county clerk and get that. The problem with that, though, again, is you still have to have identification that proves who you are. So birth certificates, things like that. And for some people, especially older Americans, minorities, people who maybe recently became citizens, that kind of thing, that can be harder for them to get that documentation. And so I would say that is the main thing. Now, that's not to say if you have if you don't have a photo ID, you can still vote, but you'll vote with a provisional ballot, which basically when you vote, it says provisional ballot. You either have to return, I think it's by the Monday following the election with a photo ID, or you can sign a sworn statement that proves who you are. And then they will verify that and make sure that that is you. But there is a chance that those could be turned down. I would say also another example would be we don't have same-day voter registration. A lot of states have that where you can register to vote on election day and vote. Some states have more access to voter registration. You can register to vote here. You can register to vote in DMV, which that's a national thing, libraries, some schools, that kind of thing. We do have early voting, which that's another way to make it more accessible. We do early voting 2 weeks before. We do have absentee voting too. Some states have really, really broad mail-in ballots. Ours has gotten better. Especially the governor made an announcement in one of his COVID-19 press conferences that is basically, if you are basically afraid to go to the polls, you can get an absentee ballot. So you don't have to provide you don't have to say, I have COVID, so I can't vote. You can get it just because you don't want to go to the polls. The trick with those there is you have to know about that, obviously, and you have to apply early. And so you have to register for absentee ballots, and then you have to send it in, and you also have to send in a photo ID with that as well. And then they will mail you a ballot. So there's a lot of logistical things that can make it more difficult. I would also say the fact that the election day is during the week too. So it's on a Tuesday, and so it's not so. Your employer has to let you off work, but not everybody is willing to take that risk. Not everybody has necessarily the time. You work nights. So our polls are open from, I believe, 7:30 to 7:30. But there's been a push to maybe we should make the election day a holiday where everybody gets it off, or maybe we should make it on a weekend. That would definitely expand it to more people.
I was curious about, I've heard a little bit about like online registration. I don't think that's available in Arkansas, but I was just curious what that looks like in other states or what that process would be.
So you can actually, I was doing some research. Now you can, sorry, I wrote this down. You can't register to vote online. You're correct. You can get an absentee ballot and send that online. So it's like if you want to, so yeah, you're correct. You can't register to vote online. There are some states that I think allow that. There are also some states that automatically send everybody a ballot. So I believe there are 5 states that automatically send, you don't even have to apply to absentee vote. They just automatically send you a ballot. But as far as voter registration, you have to, even if you can do it through mail, so you don't have to go to the county clerk. You don't have to go and get it. You can print it off. But again, you have to send a copy of your photo ID. Not everybody has access to a copy or, that kind of stuff. So I get doing it online would make it easier. If there was a way for them to, I don't know, they have access to DMV records. So, I mean, if there's I'm not sure, there's a way that they could prove you are who you say you are.
In what ways do you think COVID-19 is going to affect the upcoming elections? And do you think that's going to decrease voter turnout?
And so something to remember is elections are controlled by states. So the majority of election laws, election protocol are controlled by states. And so states are having to kind of scramble right now and figure out what they're going to do. I think there are some states, like I said, that already have a really strong mail-in ballot system anyway. I think those states will be okay because that's just the way they've done it anyway. But yeah, I think the voter turnout may be less. I feel like it's a presidential year, so we'll see. But because I do think people are afraid to go. So I think states have to really make sure they're taking extra precautions to make sure that it's safe. That might include, some states have talked about opening more polling places so that people have have more access. Another thing to think about too is poll workers are mostly older Americans and they're at more risk. And so states may have a harder time, and they just volunteer. So states may have a harder time recruiting people, which may make wait times longer. So I think people need to be expected. There's going to be lines. But I think another thing is if more people vote absentee ballot or mail-in voting, it may take longer to count. I heard a story the other day that they said that we may not know who the president is that night. It may be, because there may be a few states that they're still counting those mail-in ballots because they are not allowed to count them until the day of the election. So they can't count all those absentee ballots early. And so I feel like there may be a delay in the outcome as well. I would say too, I think there's also the feeling of mail-in ballots did not used to be controversial. And they're becoming more controversial as people worry about voter fraud and that kind of thing. But I would say have faith in your system because, like I said, the military has been using absentee ballots for years and years and years. People who live abroad, who work abroad, kids who go to college, the absentee voting, we've been doing it a long time and it's worked. We've just never done it on this scale before. And so I think that's where the slowness comes in, but I don't think that's a reason to be afraid of its accuracy or anything like that. Because like I've said, there's states who've been they do 80 to 90% of all their votes through mail. And they have shown very, insignificant amount of voter fraud.
I think you've already kind of touched on this, but in what ways do you think it would be able for Arkansas to alleviate some of that voter suppression issues?
I think having same-day registration would be amazing. I think that would be great. Maybe even expanding early voting even more. So right now you can early vote. And one thing that they do well is that you can early vote at any polling place. You don't have to go to your polling place. And so I think that has helped. That's been fairly recent, I believe. But I think expanding early voting, and I mean, I've seen arguments on both sides, but voter ID laws definitely suppress voter turnout. And so I don't know if that's something that Arkansas would consider taking on or not. But if you look at when voter ID laws were implemented versus before we were allowed, because they're fairly recent. I would say within the last 10 years or less. There was a Supreme Court decision about the Voting Rights Act that basically allowed voter ID laws to come about. And so I think you could see, a decent trend that shows that they hurt voter turnout. So I think anything that we can do to make sure that people have access is good. I mean, so as long as it's secure, and I feel like our elections are very secure. Like I said, each state runs their own. And I don't think that is a significant enough problem.
Where can Arkansans go to find out information about the candidates running in November?
So I would say great websites. There's a bunch of different ones, but Ballotopedia is a really good one. Ballotopedia, you can find any elections for any state, any area, and they will tell you exactly what's on the ballot, and then they will lead you to sites about the candidates, and so you can go to, it'll take you other places, basically. The League of Women Voters is a great organization. It's a nonpartisan organization, and every county has them. So their website is great. They also host voter registration drives, but they also host, they'll invite the candidates to come and speak. And so, and like I said, they're nonpartisan. So you always get all sides of an issue. The Secretary of State's website, so that's who runs our election, is the Secretary of State of Arkansas. And they have a voter guide. They used to make little books, and I've tried to get them in the past, but I think they stopped printing them, but it's all online. And it's basically, I think it's called Voting 101, and it's a guide to all things Arkansas. So it talks about absentee ballots and provisional and voter ID and all of that. So that's a really good place. Voterview.org. That one you can see like if you're registered and where your polling place is. More about the candidates. I Side With is a great place to go to take like a survey to see, your views and how they align with candidates. And take candidate social media pages with a bucket of salt, because of course they are biased. And so a lot of colleges too, I know the U of A, their Department of Agriculture actually, which is interesting, but they have a really great website about and they really dive into ballot initiatives. So like they go over why was it proposed and who proposed it and what's the arguments for and against it. So that's a really great place to look too.
Awesome. Yeah. And so I just kind of wrapping up, I was wondering if you had any advice for young women who were interested in politics or want to get involved with understanding current events and also what the voting process looks like.
So I would say don't be intimidated, because when I was in school getting my undergrad in political science, it is pretty male dominated. So don't be afraid of that. I would also say just get involved. Follow, politicians on social media on both sides to see what's going on. What are they talking about? Read, just educate yourself on everything that you possibly can. Just expose yourself to all kinds of ways of thinking and just know what's going on. Go to town halls. So, when candidates have a town hall, and now they're probably more going to be virtual, but when they have town halls or when they have, events, go ask questions and listen to what they have to say, even if it's a candidate you don't necessarily agree with. Go to school board meetings. So those are a great way to kind of get involved. Ask if you can talk to the mayor, talk to a superintendent, talk to the school board, just even lower level things. You can volunteer for candidates, like to work on their campaign. You can volunteer for a political party. They need volunteers badly. So if you're passionate one way or the other about a candidate or about a party, they need people to run their facility, to answer questions, to sell campaign memorabilia, to call people to ask, to do polling. Candidates are all about polls. And so there's lots of ways you can volunteer and get involved.
So going off of that, do you have any advice for young women interested in economics?
I would say the same thing as far as like getting educated. And I would say, especially with economics, don't be intimidated. Because I remember when I took it in college, it was intimidating because there's a lot of math and I was not very strong at math. And so don't be scared. If it's something that you're interested in, work hard, ask for help. It's okay to not know. It's okay to not understand. Ask, especially when you're in college or high school, ask the teacher. If they explain it again and you still don't get it, ask them again, because it's their job to help you. Even college professors, don't try not to be intimidated by that. And if they don't answer your question, then find somebody else, because you will find somebody that will help you. And there's so many online resources too that are really great to help you as well. But again, econ is kind of a man's world too. And so just don't be intimidated by that. There's lots of programs, sort of like STEM, to get more women involved. And so look for those. I'm sure there's scholarship opportunities and stuff like that as well.
So I was just wondering, do you think AP Gov better prepares young voters compared to Arkansas's curriculum?
I would say for AP Gov, some teachers have to teach it in a semester. And I feel like that's really a time crunch. But AP Gov's curriculum, the College Board's curriculum, goes much more in depth. With a lot of topics that I feel like the civics curriculum kind of brushes over. They don't necessarily get into like the how to vote and stuff like that, but I feel like it does a better job of teaching some of those critical thinking skills, and like deep dive into historical documents and things like that. So I do feel, and I teach it in a year. And so I feel like I would say you're going to know more taking an AP Gov class than you would taking a normal civics class. Yes, just because it's more time and you're exposed to more things.
I've been seeing a lot of things that like kind of on two different sides of like, yes, it's important to vote, but then other people are saying that like, oh, with the things that we're trying to do and like the ability to reform is like not an option, or we're not able to reform, And so their argument is that like voting isn't actually going to do anything, because regardless of like this whole like two-party system is not serving anyone the right way. And so I guess like, how do you address that? Or I don't know, is there anything we can read to like learn more about it? Because I've seen both of those and I can see both sides, I guess, but it's kind of confusing trying to like wrap my head around what that all means.
I would say if you don't vote, you're not necessarily as included in the conversation. I feel like it's important to do both. And candidates change over time. People change over time. And so if there's there's a particular candidate where you're like, well, they're okay, but they're not exactly what I want. They don't, if you don't engage in the system, you can't inspire people to change. You can't push them to include more things in their platform. For example, like if you take Bernie and Hillary, for example, Bernie Sanders forced Hillary Clinton to talk about a lot of things that she never would have talked about. And so I feel like voters, by not voting for her, not that they swayed the election, I don't know, but by kind of taking a step out and saying, you know what, she's not what I want, so I'm just not going to vote at all. They hurt a lot of the progress that could have been made, maybe. And they also, just because you can just say, you know what, I don't like Joe Biden, I don't like Donald Trump, so I'm not going to vote for president, but I'm going to vote for school board. I'm going to vote for the local things, because those do rely on just a handful of votes to swing it one way or the other. And so I think that's totally fine too. And they're not as exciting, the school board election isn't like a page turner, but they do matter. I mean, because like with the mask thing, I mean, that's going to directly impact, like Anna right now, that's going to directly impact, well, I mean, the governor already said it, but whatever. If the governor hadn't have, or those K through 5 kids, that's directly impacting their life. And so when we had school board elections 2 years ago, I'm sure that's not something anybody thought about. Just educate yourself and, be part of the solution, not the problem. And have faith in our election and our electoral system. I mean, you can critique it all you want. The Electoral College, I feel like there's plenty of room to critique that. But in terms of the security of our elections and I feel like there are things that still need to be done. There are foreign countries that are right now trying to hack into certain things. I don't know, they're not going to be able to hack and change votes, but they're trying to stir dissent, just like they did in 2016. Mm-hmm. And so, but I feel like educate yourself about that stuff, know what's going on, but also, have faith in our electoral system as well.
All right. Thank you so much, Ms. Wiens, for taking the time to speak with us and answer some of our questions. We really loved discussing with you, and thank you for sharing all the resources that you had. Thank you everyone for watching. Tune in next week on August 7th to see our speaker series on COVID-19 and how it affects different demographics.
And if you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up down below. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe and turn on your post notifications. And if you want to see more of Loud Women, go check out our website, loudwomencommunity.org. And you can also follow us on Instagram at Loud Women Community to stay up to date on everything our organization is doing.
We'll see you next time.
Bye.